Commander Vex Talor had survived the acid storms of Melthrix Prime, where the rain could dissolve titanium armor in under 30 seconds. He'd walked barefoot across the glass deserts of Scorthane, where each grain of sand was sharp enough to slice through reinforced combat boots and hot enough to cauterize the wounds it created. He'd literally punched his way through an active volcano on Peraxis 7, using nothing but his bare fists and what the Academy instructors called aggressive stupidity. He'd spent 3 months buried alive on Necrosia, sustaining himself by eating the carnivorous worms that tried to devour him from the inside out. Yet here he was, crouched behind a pathetic earth shrub that wouldn't survive 5 minutes on any respectable Deathworld, trembling like a newly hatched grub because water was falling from the sky. Plain, ordinary, harmless water. "Sir!" whispered Lieutenant Kixandra, her voice barely audible through the comm system, despite being amplified by military-grade audio enhancement technology. The liquid. It's still descending. I've counted 47 separate impacts in the last 30 seconds. Vextaler's 3 hearts hammered against his ribcage in a rhythm that would have made excellent war drums, if anyone had been brave enough to suggest such a thing while he was cowering behind decorative vegetation. Another droplet landed precisely 2 inches from his left boot with that soft, gentle plick sound that sent shockwaves of pure, unadulterated terror through his nervous system. This was wrong on every conceivable level. Wrong in ways that defied the fundamental laws of physics, biology, and common sense. Wrong in ways that made his extensive military training feel like a children's finger-painting class. The Galactic Survival Academy had prepared them for everything. Everything. They'd trained on worlds where the gravity was so intense it could compress coal into diamonds just by looking at it sternly. Where the atmosphere was composed entirely of sentient poison that held personal grudges against organic life forms. Where the local wildlife had evolved beyond the need for such mundane things as physics and the impossibility of existing in 4 dimensions simultaneously. Vextaler personally held the Academy record for longest survival time on Necros Thule, a planet so monumentally hostile that its own geological formations had developed a taste for violence and a hobby of rearranging themselves specifically to crush visitors. The rocks there didn't just fall on you, they planned it out in advance, held strategy meetings, and took turns to ensure maximum psychological impact before the actual crushing began. He'd graduated summa cum laude from the Advanced Hostile Environment course, where the final exam involved spending 72 hours on a world where the air was on fire, the water was sentient and holding a grudge, and the local plant life had formed a union specifically dedicated to making visitors as miserable as possible before eventually digesting them. But nobody had warned them about this. "Commander," came the shaky voice of Specialist Rook Mantis through the static-filled communication channel, "I've run 17 different atmospheric analyses, cross-referenced them with toxicology databases from 43 different star systems, and conducted spectral analysis using every sensor array we have. The falling liquid it's just water, sir. Plain, ordinary, completely and utterly harmless water." Harmless? The word hit Vextaler's consciousness like a meteor impact on an unshielded planet. He nearly laughed out loud, which would have been catastrophically unfortunate because opening his mouth might have allowed some of the deadly precipitation to enter his respiratory system, where it could do absolutely nothing whatsoever, which was precisely what made it so terrifying. There was nothing harmless about liquid falling from an unlimited height at terminal velocity. The kinetic energy alone should be pulverizing everything it touched. Basic physics demanded that objects falling from such altitude should be creating impact craters, shattering stone, and generally behaving like the universe had any sense of dramatic appropriateness. Instead, The droplets were landing with all the destructive force of a butterfly's sneeze. Yet the local vegetation seemed not just content, but positively enthusiastic about letting this liquid death rain down upon it. In fact, the primitive plant life appeared to be enjoying the experience in ways that suggested either advanced masochistic tendencies or a complete break from evolutionary common sense. Several nearby flowers had actually opened wider, as if inviting the atmospheric assault to continue with greater intensity. The sight was so fundamentally wrong that Vextella's tactical training systems were throwing error messages. This planet was clearly inhabited by masochists, managed by sadists, and designed by someone with a deeply disturbed sense of humor. "Sir, we've been monitoring the local fauna for the past 18 minutes, reported Communications Officer Tippelos from somewhere behind what appeared to be a decorative garden ornament shaped like a small humanoid wearing what looked like a pointed hat. The indigenous creatures are not seeking shelter. In fact, several specimens seem to be deliberately exposing themselves to the precipitation. Furthermore, sir, they appear to be enjoying it." Did through his enhanced tactical visor, which had cost more than most planets' annual defense budgets, Vexatela observed a creature that their xenobiology database had classified as a bird, a primitive flying organism with what appeared to be natural armor plating made of modified scales. The creature was literally sitting on a branch, completely exposed, while the death water cascaded over its feathers in a display of either supreme confidence or complete insanity. But it got worse. Much worse. The bird appeared to be, was it possible? Was it actually singing, making melodious sounds that their translation software was categorizing as expressions of contentment and joy? The psychological warfare implications were staggering. This planet had somehow weaponized the concept of happiness itself. "Status report!" Vex Taylor barked through his comm system, immediately regretting raising his voice as several more droplets responded to the sound by falling in his general direction, as if the very atmosphere was personally offended by loud noises. "All squad members accounted for and paralyzed with terror, sir," came the unified response from his team, delivered in the kind of coordinated precision that would have made their drill instructors proud, if those same instructors weren't currently several light years away on planets where the weather behaved in sensible, predictable, homicidal ways. Sergeant Colthrex, veteran of the infamous Maelstrom campaigns and holder of the Silver Star for exceptional survival against impossible odds, was currently wedged under what appeared to be a child's bicycle, whimpering in a manner that would have gotten him court-martialed if anyone had been recording it. The bicycle itself was a technological marvel of primitive engineering, two circular objects connected by a frame and designed for transportation purposes that seemed to completely ignore several important laws regarding balance and common sense. Private Yexandra, who had once single-handedly survived an entire month on Carnage World by eating her own equipment and using her emergency rations as improvised weapons, was attempting to make herself smaller behind a garden gnome that was approximately half her size. The gnome, according to their cultural database, was apparently a decorative object that humans placed in their outdoor spaces for reasons that anthropologists were still debating. Corporal Wexelinder, survivor of the great toxic waste ocean crossing of Venom Prime, was hyperventilating behind what appeared to be a small wooden structure designed to house primitive communication devices. The structure was painted a cheerful shade of blue that seemed to mock their current state of terror. This was the elite of the elite, the cream of the crop. The individuals who had graduated with highest honors from the most prestigious military academy in the known galaxy, having survived training programs that had a mortality rate that would make other military institutions weep with envy. They were the ones other species called when they needed someone to survive the completely and utterly unsurvivable. And they were currently being defeated by moisture, not radioactive moisture, not acidic moisture, Not moisture that had been weaponized, militarized, or enhanced with exotic particles. Just moisture. Plain, simple, ordinary moisture that was falling from the sky, because that's apparently what moisture did on this insane planet. The Academy had a saying, carved into the memorial wall in letters 3 feet high. If you can survive the 500 Deathworlds, you can survive anywhere in the known universe. Apparently, anywhere in the known universe had some rather significant exceptions that the curriculum had somehow failed to mention. Vex Taylor's comm unit crackled to life with an incoming transmission from their orbiting command ship, the GSS Inevitable Doom, which was currently maintaining a safe distance of approximately 50,000 kilometers from the planet's surface because even spacefaring military vessels had standards. Ground Team Alpha, this is Captain Zulkaran. What's your status? Your biosignatures are reading as extremely agitated, and our medical scanners are detecting stress hormones at levels typically associated with imminent death or marriage proposals. Captain! Vex Taylor whispered urgently into his comm unit, not daring to speak any louder, lest he attract more falling liquid through some unknown atmospheric mechanism. We need immediate extraction. The planet is under attack by weather. A long pause followed, during which Vex Taylor could practically hear the captain's brain, attempting to process this information and failing spectacularly. Come again, Commander? Did you just say the planet is under attack by weather? The atmosphere is weaponized, sir. Liquid projectiles are being deployed from an altitude of approximately 10,000 meters using some kind of natural delivery system. They're using the planet's own gravitational field as an ammunition distribution mechanism. It's diabolical in its simplicity. Another pause, longer this time. In the background, Vex Taylor could hear what sounded like muffled laughter, which was either someone on the bridge having a nervous breakdown or someone who didn't properly understand the severity of the situation. Commander, our meteorological sensors show that you're experiencing what the planetary database classifies as light rain. According to our xenocultural research files, this is a common meteorological phenomenon on Class M worlds with stable atmospheric systems. Surely your extensive training at the Academy... Training! Training! Vex Taylor's voice cracked with the kind of hysteria typically reserved for people who had just discovered that everything they believed about the universe was fundamentally incorrect. They trained us on worlds where the rain was lava, Captain, where precipitation came in the form of crystallized pain that screamed as it fell, where water fell upward at supersonic speeds and caught fire mid-flight while playing funeral dirges. He paused to catch his breath, which was difficult because breathing required opening his mouth, and opening his mouth might allow some of the falling liquid to enter his respiratory system, where it would do absolutely nothing, which was exactly the problem. But this is just water, sir, offered Lieutenant Kixandra helpfully, her voice carrying the kind of helpful tone that suggested she was either trying to be supportive or had suffered a complete psychological break. Exactly. Vex Taylor was now approaching what humans might recognize as a full-scale nervous breakdown, complete with dramatic gestures that were somewhat limited by his current position crouched behind a shrub. It's just water. There's no logical reason to fear it, no evolutionary imperative, no survival instinct, which makes it the most terrifying thing in the entire universe. From his hiding spot behind the garden gnome, Private Yexandra made a sound that could charitably be described as a whimper, and uncharitably described as the sound a grown soldier makes when confronted with the complete inadequacy of their worldview. Sir, I think I can see the bottom of one of the droplets. It's transparent, sir. Completely transparent. I can see through it to the ground beneath. How are we supposed to defend against something we can see through? How do you plan tactical maneuvers against an enemy that refuses to block your line of sight? This was, Vex Taylor had to admit, a valid tactical concern. Their entire combat philosophy was based on identifying threats, assessing their capabilities, and neutralizing them through the application of superior firepower, advanced technology, or creative use of explosives. But how do you neutralize something that appears to be harmless? How do you fight an enemy that refuses to behave like an enemy? How do you defeat something that seems to exist purely to confuse and disorient highly trained military personnel? "Movement detected!" hissed Specialist Rook Mantis, his voice carrying the kind of urgency typically reserved for announcing incoming artillery strikes or surprise tax audits. Multiple contacts approaching from the northeast, range approximately 50 meters, and closing. Through the falling liquid death, several shapes emerged from what appeared to be a residential structure. The building itself was another testament to the bizarre architectural priorities of this species. It seemed to be designed for aesthetics rather than defense, with large, transparent sections that would provide absolutely no protection against any reasonable form of attack. There were even decorative plants arranged around the perimeter, as if the inhabitants were actively trying to make their dwelling as indefensible as possible. Vex Tala's tactical display immediately classified the approaching shapes as Class H humanoids, the local dominant species that their reconnaissance files had identified as surprisingly resilient for a species that hasn't discovered proper armor yet. But something was fundamentally wrong with the readings his equipment was providing. The creatures were outside, in the rain, without any form of environmental protection whatsoever. "By the 7 moons of Cardrex and the blessed asteroid belt of Saint Destructo," breathed Sergeant Colthrex from beneath the bicycle, his voice carrying the kind of religious awe typically reserved for witnessing divine intervention or exceptionally large explosions. "They're not wearing environmental suits. They don't even have basic atmospheric filters." One of the humans, a small specimen that their xenobiology database had classified as a child, which appeared to be some sort of miniature version of the adult form, was doing something that defied every known law of survival, common sense, and basic self-preservation instincts. It was running toward a collection of water puddles that had formed on the ground surface, and then... "It's jumping in them!" screamed Lieutenant Kixandra, her voice reaching octaves that would have made opera singers jealous and dolphins concerned. "The creature is deliberately immersing itself in the accumulated liquid death. This species has clearly evolved some form of supernatural liquid immunity, or they've developed technology so advanced that it's indistinguishable from magic." But the horror, the absolute mind-breaking horror, was only beginning. The small human was not just surviving direct contact with the accumulated water, it was not just enduring the experience with stoic resignation. It was making sounds that their translation software, after running the audio through 17 different linguistic analysis programs, had classified as laughter. The creature was enjoying the experience of being pelted by falling liquid and then deliberately immersing itself in the stuff. This was beyond psychological warfare. This was a complete rejection of everything they understood about survival, evolution, and the basic principles that governed life in a hostile universe. "Sir," whispered Communications Officer Thipolos, his voice trembling with the kind of existential terror that philosophers experienced when contemplating the infinite nature of stupidity. I think it's playing in the water. Playing. As if potentially deadly atmospheric precipitation was some form of recreational activity rather than a natural disaster that any sensible species would either avoid or weaponize. "Psychological warfare," muttered Vex Taylor grimly, his tactical mind desperately trying to impose some kind of logical framework on the absolute chaos of what he was witnessing. "They're trying to demonstrate their superiority by showing us how they can not only survive their own planet's defenses, but actually derive entertainment value from them. It's a classic intimidation tactic designed to demoralize enemy forces through displays of casual invulnerability. A larger human emerged from the residential structure, and Vex Tyler's attention was immediately drawn to what appeared to be a technological marvel of unprecedented sophistication. The device the creature was carrying was dome-shaped, constructed from some form of advanced polymer that seemed to be both lightweight and incredibly durable, and mounted on an extendable support structure that appeared to be engineered for optimal portability and deployment speed. "New contact!" shouted Communications Officer Tipilos, his voice carrying the kind of urgency typically reserved for announcing incoming nuclear weapons or the discovery that someone had been using military equipment to brew coffee. "The large humanoid is deploying some kind of liquid deflection field." The human opened the device above its head with a casual movement that spoke of years of practice and familiarity, and the falling water simply bounced off, not vaporized, not absorbed, not neutralized through some complex technological process. It just bounced off and fell harmlessly to the ground, as if the device had somehow convinced the water that it really didn't want to land on that particular spot. The creature had achieved perfect protection from the atmospheric assault, using what appeared to be nothing more than fabric stretched over a collapsible framework. The engineering elegance was so simple, it was terrifying. "Umbrella," whispered Specialist Rookmantis, consulting his translation database with the kind of reverence typically reserved for ancient religious texts or instruction manuals for nuclear weapons. "The device is called an umbrella. According to the cultural database, it's a common personal protective device that has been in use for thousands of their years. Thousands of years. Thousands of years. This species had been dealing with atmospheric liquid bombardment for millennia and had not only developed effective countermeasures, but had refined them to the point where they were considered everyday household items." Vextalor stared in a combination of awe, terror, and the kind of professional jealousy that occurs when you realize that a supposedly primitive species has solved a problem that your own advanced civilization had never even considered might exist. These humans had not only learned to survive their planet's liquid bombardment, they had developed technology to defend against it. Simple, elegant, efficient technology that probably cost less than a single meal at the academy cafeteria and was apparently so reliable that parents trusted their children's lives to it. Meanwhile they, the elite graduates of 500 Deathworlds, the cream of galactic military culture, the individuals who other species called when they needed someone to survive situations that defied the basic laws of physics, were hiding behind garden decorations like frightened younglings who had just discovered that monsters were real and they were currently having tea with one. "Sir," came a new voice through the comm system. It was Dr. Melthyra from the research division aboard their orbiting ship, and her tone carried the kind of academic excitement that suggested she had either made a breakthrough discovery or had suffered a complete mental breakdown. "I've been analyzing the atmospheric composition, meteorological data, and ecological interaction patterns. This rain phenomenon appears to be, well, it's actually beneficial to the local ecosystem." Beneficial. Beneficial. The word hit Vex Taylor's consciousness like a guided missile striking an ammunition depot. He felt something inside his mind break just a little bit more, like a support beam in a building that had been designed by someone who had never heard of structural engineering. The water provides hydration for plant life, replenishes groundwater supplies, maintains atmospheric humidity at optimal levels, and supports the delicate environmental balance that makes this planet capable of supporting the diversity of life we're observing. Dr. Melthyra continued, apparently oblivious to the fact that her words were causing multiple mental breakdowns among the ground team. They were being terrorized by a planetary life support system. The very thing that made this world habitable was the same thing that had reduced them to quivering lumps of combat-trained jelly hiding behind decorative garden features. "The humans," Vextalor said slowly, his voice carrying the kind of dawning horror typically reserved for people who had just realized they had been paying taxes to the wrong government for the past decade. They need this to survive. That's absolutely correct, Commander. Without regular precipitation, their agricultural systems would fail, their water supplies would dwindle, their entire ecosystem would collapse, and their civilization would cease to exist within a matter of months. So they weren't just surviving the liquid death, they were dependent on it. These humans had built their entire society, their technology, their agriculture, and probably their recreational activities around something that had turned the galaxy's most elite soldiers into a collection of terrified individuals hiding behind lawn ornaments and garden gnomes. The philosophical implications were staggering. It suggested that perhaps, just perhaps, their entire understanding of what constituted a hostile environment might be slightly, somewhat, completely, and utterly incorrect. A new sound reached his auditory receptors, cutting through the gentle patter of rain, like a blade through silk. Footsteps, human footsteps, approaching through the rain with the kind of casual confidence that suggested either complete fearlessness or total insanity. "Hello there!" called a cheerful voice in the local language, the words carried clearly through the falling precipitation. "Are you folks all right? You look like you're having some trouble with the weather." Through his translator, a device that had cost more than most starships and could handle over 3 million different languages, dialects, and forms of communication, including several that existed only in theoretical mathematics, Vextalor understood every word. A human was approaching their position, apparently completely oblivious to the fact that liquid death was currently cascading all around them at terminal velocity. The creature, a middle-aged female by their biological classification system, was not just surviving the atmospheric bombardment, she was actually smiling. Her facial expression indicated contentment, friendliness, and the kind of casual concern that neighbors might show when noticing that someone was having difficulty with their landscaping. "Beautiful day for the garden, isn't it?" the human continued, gesturing toward the plants that were greedily absorbing the falling water like addicts who had just discovered their drug of choice was both legal and falling from the sky. "The roses especially love a good rain shower. They've been looking a bit thirsty lately." Love. Love! This species had not only learned to tolerate atmospheric assault patterns, they had formed emotional attachments to them. They spoke about precipitation the way other species might discuss a beloved family member or a particularly effective weapon system. We're fine," Vextalor managed to croak out through his translator, his voice carrying the kind of strained cheerfulness typically associated with hostage negotiations or diplomatic incidents involving nuclear weapons. Just taking shelter from the... He found himself unable to complete the sentence. How do you explain to a member of a species that thrives on liquid bombardment that you're hiding from their life-giving precipitation because your advanced military training has identified it as a clear and present danger to your psychological well-being? From the rain? The human laughed at their plight, the sound carrying the kind of genuine amusement that suggested she found their situation either endearing or completely incomprehensible. "Oh, this is nothing. You should see what it's like during a real storm. Last week we had hail the size of golf balls, and the week before that we had a thunderstorm that knocked out power to half the county. Hail, frozen projectiles, and she was speaking about them with the same casual tone one might use to discuss the weather on. Well, on any normal planet, where weather didn't involve solid liquid ammunition falling from the sky at ballistic velocities." Vex Taylor's mind reeled at the implications. This species regularly endured bombardment by ice bullets and considered it worthy of casual conversation. They had thunderstorms, which his database informed him involved electrical discharge combined with acoustic weapons, and treated them as minor inconveniences rather than acts of atmospheric warfare. Golf balls. queried Lieutenant Kixandra weakly, her voice carrying the kind of desperate hope that suggested she was clinging to the possibility that this might all turn out to be some sort of misunderstanding. Small, spherical recreational implements, provided the translation system helpfully, approximately 1.68 inches in diameter, typically constructed of synthetic materials around a rubber core, and designed for use in a game that involves hitting them with metal sticks towards small holes in the ground. So they were discussing frozen water projectiles nearly 2 inches across, falling from the sky at terminal velocity, and this human was speaking about it with the same casual tone one might use to discuss recreational activities. Furthermore, the translation system had just informed them that humans had invented a game that involved hitting small objects with metal implements, which suggested a species with either highly developed hand-eye coordination or serious anger management issues. "You know what?" the human said, pulling out her own umbrella with the kind of practiced ease that spoke of years of experience dealing with atmospheric liquid bombardment. "I think I have a spare one of these in the car. You folks look like you could use some protection from the rain." Protection. She was offering them protection. This primitive species had identified their weakness and was offering assistance with the same casual friendliness that they might show when offering directions to lost tourists or suggestions for local restaurants. It was either the most elaborate psychological warfare operation in galactic history, designed to lull them into a false sense of security before revealing their true hostile intentions, or they were actually trying to help. The possibility that this species might be genuinely altruistic was somehow more terrifying than any alternative explanation Vex Taylor could imagine. The human returned moments later, moving through the rain with the kind of casual confidence that would have made their academy instructors weep with envy. She was carrying not one but several umbrellas of various sizes and colors, and she handed them out to the cowering soldiers with the same casual friendliness one might show when offering refreshments at a social gathering. "There you go," she said brightly, her voice carrying the kind of cheerful satisfaction that suggested she had just solved a minor problem rather than potentially saved the lives of several highly trained military personnel. "These should keep you nice and dry. Though I have to say you picked a funny place to take shelter. That rose bush has some serious thorns." Serious thorn. She was warning them about plant spikes while standing completely unprotected in falling liquid. The priority system of this species made absolutely no sense whatsoever, according to any logical framework that Vex Taylor could imagine. Any reasonable species would prioritize protection from atmospheric bombardment over concerns about minor plant-based puncture wounds. But these humans seemed to operate according to some completely alien logic that treated dangerous vegetation as a greater concern than liquid falling from the sky. Vex Taylor cautiously accepted the umbrella device, marveling at its simple yet effective design. The construction was elegant in its simplicity, a collapsible framework supporting a dome of water-resistant fabric with a handle designed for optimal grip and control. The entire device weighed almost nothing, yet provided complete protection from precipitation. The human demonstrated its operation with the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to slow learners, which, Vex Taylor had to admit, was probably an accurate assessment of their current situation. "Just hold it like this, and the rain rolls right off. Been using these things for thousands of years. Not the most high-tech solution, but they get the job done. Thousands of years. They had been defending against liquid atmospheric assault for thousands of years, and had perfected the technology to the point where it was considered so mundane, so utterly commonplace, that they gave it away to strangers without a second thought. The engineering implications were staggering. This suggested a species that had not only survived regular atmospheric bombardment, but had developed countermeasures so effective and so economical that they had become standard personal equipment. Every human apparently owned multiple units, and considered them about as remarkable as breathing apparatus or gravity manipulation devices. Under the protective dome of the umbrella, Vex Taylor felt his heart rate begin to return to something approaching normal for the first time since the precipitation had begun. The gentle patter of water against the fabric was almost soothing. No, that couldn't be right. Nothing about falling liquid should be soothing. The very concept violated everything he understood about proper threat assessment and survival instincts. "You folks are new around here, aren't you?" the human asked conversationally, her tone carrying the kind of friendly curiosity that neighbors might show when greeting new residents. "I don't think I've seen your style of clothing before. Very metallic, and that equipment looks pretty high-tech." "We're tourists," Vex Taylor managed, which wasn't entirely untrue. They were technically touring the planet, albeit for reconnaissance purposes rather than recreational ones. Just visiting the area. "Well, welcome to Earth. You picked a great time to visit. Spring rain is wonderful for the garden, and everything's starting to bloom. Though if you're not used to our weather, you might want to check the forecast before heading out. We're expecting thunderstorms later this week." Thunderstorms. Thunderstorms. Not only did this planet regularly rain liquid death, but it occasionally added electrical discharge and acoustic weapons to the mix, and she was discussing it like it was a mild inconvenience that could be managed with proper planning. The forecast," stammered Lieutenant Kixandra, her voice carrying the kind of desperate hope that suggested she was still clinging to the possibility that this might all make sense eventually. "Oh yes, we have entire systems dedicated to predicting weather patterns. Satellites, radar networks, computer models, meteorological stations, the works. Got to know when to bring in the laundry and when to water the plants. Though honestly, Mother Nature usually takes care of the watering for us. They had orbital surveillance networks dedicated to tracking liquid bombardment patterns. The military applications were absolutely staggering. These humans could predict atmospheric assaults days in advance, track their movement patterns, and plan accordingly. They had turned weather prediction into a science so precise that they could schedule their daily activities around it, and they called it bringing in the laundry. Speaking of which," the human continued, glancing at what appeared to be a small personal communication device that probably had more computing power than their ship's navigation system, "looks like this shower should pass in about 20 minutes. You folks picked a good spot to wait it out, even if it is a bit unconventional. 20 minutes. She could predict the duration of the liquid assault down to the minute, using a device small enough to fit in her pocket. The technological sophistication, hidden behind apparent simplicity, was mind-boggling. They were dealing with a species that had not only learned to survive regular atmospheric bombardment, but had developed prediction systems, protective technology, and integration strategies that turned their planet's most dangerous feature into a manageable part of daily life. We should probably return to our vehicle," Vex Taylor said, gesturing vaguely toward their concealed transport while trying to maintain the facade that they were anything other than terrified military personnel hiding from weather. "Of course, you keep those umbrellas as long as you need them. If you're planning to stick around for a while, you might want to invest in some proper rain gear. The sporting goods store downtown has everything you need: raincoats, boots, hats, waterproof jackets. They even have those clear umbrellas if you like to see where you're going." Clear umbrellas, transparent liquid deflection technology. The engineering implications were absolutely staggering. Not only had they perfected protection from atmospheric precipitation, but they had developed variations that allowed for enhanced visibility while maintaining defensive capabilities. The level of technological sophistication hidden behind simple, everyday objects was unlike anything in the galactic databases. That's very kind of you," Vex Taylor managed. his training in diplomatic protocols finally overriding his terror long enough to produce appropriate social responses. No problem at all. That's what neighbors are for. Hope you enjoy the rest of your visit, and don't let a little rain keep you from exploring. There's lots to see around here. The human walked away, strolling casually through the falling water as if it were the most natural thing in the universe, which Vextalor was beginning to realize with a growing sense of existential horror. It probably was. For these humans, atmospheric liquid bombardment wasn't a survival challenge to be overcome or a natural disaster to be endured. It was just weather, a normal part of their daily existence that they planned around, prepared for, and apparently enjoyed. As the rain continued to fall around them, more humans began to emerge from nearby structures. Children ran out to play in the puddles, their laughter echoing through the air like some sort of bizarre battle cry. Adults emerged with gardening tools, apparently eager to take advantage of the moistened soil. Teenagers gathered under covered areas, chatting and socializing as if liquid bombardment was a perfectly normal backdrop for social interaction. One particularly disturbing sight was an elderly human who had emerged with what appeared to be a primitive collection device, deliberately gathering the falling liquid in containers for later use. The creature was harvesting the atmospheric assault for personal consumption. "Sir," Communications Officer Thipolos whispered urgently, "multiple contacts are engaging in collection and consumption behaviors. They appear to be drinking the liquid death." Indeed, several humans had emerged with cups and containers, allowing them to fill with rainwater and then consuming the contents directly. They were voluntarily ingesting the same substance that had reduced elite galactic soldiers to quivering masses of terror. "Sir!" came Sergeant Colthrex's voice through the comm system. "What are your orders?" Vextalor looked around at his squad, the elite fighting force of the Galactic Coalition, veterans of campaigns on worlds that existed in defiance of several important natural laws, cowering under primitive fabric shields that had been freely given to them by a middle-aged human who treated atmospheric liquid bombardment like a minor inconvenience. The rain began to lighten, exactly as the human had predicted with her pocket-sized weather prediction device. Gradually, the falling droplets decreased in frequency and intensity until they stopped entirely, leaving behind a world that seemed somehow cleaner and fresher than it had been before the liquid assault began. Vextalor cautiously lowered his umbrella, half expecting the atmospheric assault to resume without warning as some sort of final psychological warfare tactic. Instead, something even more remarkable happened. The sun emerged from behind the retreating clouds, and the accumulated water began to evaporate, creating what their environmental sensors identified as increased humidity and what humans apparently called that fresh, clean smell after rain. The very air seemed to sparkle with moisture droplets that caught and reflected the sunlight in millions of tiny rainbows. It was, against all logic and reason, actually quite beautiful. Within minutes, more humans appeared, as if materializing from their protective structures. They emerged in greater numbers than before, many carrying what appeared to be primitive cultivation tools and containers designed for liquid transportation. Several headed directly toward the areas where the atmospheric bombardment had fallen most heavily. "They're farming the impact zones," breathed Specialist Rook Mantis in awe, his voice carrying the kind of religious reverence typically reserved for witnessing miracles or the successful detonation of antimatter weapons. "They're using the areas affected by the liquid bombardment for food production." It was true. The humans were deliberately planting their sustenance crops in the exact locations where they knew atmospheric liquid would fall. They had not just adapted to their planet's bombardment cycles, they had weaponized them. They had turned their world's most dangerous feature into an agricultural advantage that supported their entire civilization. "Commander," came Dr. Milthyra's voice from orbit, her tone carrying the kind of academic excitement that suggested she had either made the discovery of the century or had completely lost her mind. Are you getting readings on this? The humans are demonstrating the most sophisticated adaptation to hostile planetary conditions I've ever documented. They're not just surviving their environment, they're thriving because of it. Thriving. These humans had looked at a planet that regularly bombarded them with falling liquid and had somehow turned it into a paradise. Their cities were green with vegetation that depended on the regular atmospheric assaults. Their recreational activities included deliberately exposing themselves to precipitation. Their children played in the accumulated liquid death as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. Several more humans had emerged from nearby structures, and their behavior was becoming increasingly incomprehensible. One elderly human was actually watering plants with additional liquid from a container, apparently deciding that the natural bombardment hadn't been sufficient for optimal plant health. Another was washing some sort of vehicle using the same liquid that had just fallen from the sky for free. A group of human younglings had discovered a particularly large puddle and were engaged in some sort of competitive splashing activity, their joyful screams echoing through the area like the battle cries of warriors celebrating victory. Adult humans watched this display with expressions of fond amusement rather than the horror that any sensible species would demonstrate when observing their offspring deliberately immersing themselves in potentially lethal substances. "Sir," Lieutenant Cassandra said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of careful thoughtfulness that suggested she was approaching a conclusion that might fundamentally alter their understanding of the universe. "I'm beginning to think we may have misunderstood the nature of this planet." "How so?" "Well, sir, what if the rain isn't the planet's defense system? What if it's not a weapon or a threat or a challenge to be overcome? What if it's just rain? And what if we're the ones with the problem?" Vexatalor considered this carefully, his mind struggling to process concepts that violated everything he had been taught about survival, adaptation, and the fundamental nature of planetary environments. They had trained on worlds where survival meant avoiding everything the environment could throw at them, where the successful strategy was always defense, adaptation, and endurance, where the planet was always the enemy, and victory meant outlasting its attempts to kill you. But these humans had embraced their planet's challenges. They had integrated the falling liquid into their society, their technology, their agriculture, their recreation, and their very way of life. They had achieved something that no other species in the coalition had ever managed: true harmony with a dynamic environment. The more he observed, the more obvious it became that humans didn't just tolerate their environment. They had made it part of themselves. Their architecture incorporated rain runoff systems that channeled water into decorative features and practical applications. Their clothing included specialized variants designed specifically for different precipitation conditions. Their language had dozens of words for different types of liquid bombardment. Their culture celebrated rain in art, music, and literature. They had even developed recreational activities specifically designed around atmospheric liquid bombardment. Through his visor, Vexatalor could see humans emerging with strange implements. Containers designed to collect rainwater for later use, devices for measuring precipitation levels, and what appeared to be decorative objects intended to enhance the aesthetic appeal of falling water. Unhuman had emerged, carrying what looked like a primitive musical instrument, and was playing melodic tones that seemed to complement the sound of water dripping from leaves and flowing through drainage systems. Other humans gathered around to listen, creating an impromptu performance that used the aftermath of atmospheric bombardment as accompaniment. They were creating RT inspired by liquid falling from the sky. "Commander!" came another transmission from Dr. Milthyra. "I've been analyzing the cultural databases we've collected. Did you know that humans have entire festivals dedicated to rain? They have celebrations, ceremonies, and artistic traditions, all centered around precipitation. In some regions, rain is considered so vital and precious that they worship it as a divine blessing." Worship. Worship! This species had elevated atmospheric liquid bombardment to the level of religious experience. Vextler watched as more humans emerged and began engaging in post-rain activities. Some were examining their gardens with obvious satisfaction, pointing out how the recent precipitation had benefited their plants. Others were opening windows and doors to let in the fresh air that had been cleaned by the atmospheric assault. Children were running between puddles, apparently engaged in some sort of game that involved avoiding or deliberately stepping in the accumulated liquid. Their laughter created a soundtrack of pure joy that seemed to transform the very nature of what they had just witnessed. A human child ran up to an adult carrying an umbrella, apparently asking if they could share the protection. But instead of seeking shelter, the child pointed excitedly at puddles they wanted to explore. The adult smiled and closed the umbrella, allowing both of them to get wet while they examined the water formations together. They were choosing exposure to the liquid bombardment over protection from it. More disturbing still was the sight of humans emerging with specialized equipment designed to interact with the post-bombardment environment. Some carried tools for measuring soil moisture levels. Others had devices for collecting samples of the fallen liquid for analysis. Still others were documenting the effects of the precipitation on local plant life. This wasn't just adaptation to a hostile environment. This was a species that had evolved in partnership with their planet's natural systems, creating a symbiotic relationship that made both the humans and their world stronger. We observe, Vextler said finally, his voice carrying the kind of careful control that suggested he was holding on to his sanity through sheer force of will. We need to understand this species better. Anyone who can casually survive their planet's defense systems while offering assistance to terrified strangers is either the most sophisticated psychological warfare specialists in the galaxy or what, sir? Asked Private Yexandra. Or they're completely insane, and that makes them more dangerous than anything we've ever encountered. As if to prove his point, a group of human adolescents emerged from a nearby structure and immediately began engaging in what appeared to be competitive athletic activities in the post-rain environment. They were running, jumping, and performing acrobatic maneuvers on surfaces that were still wet from the recent bombardment. They were using the aftermath of atmospheric assault as an opportunity for physical conditioning and recreational competition. "Sir," whispered Communications Officer Thypilos, his voice carrying the kind of awe typically reserved for witnessing divine intervention or the successful deployment of planet-cracking weapons. The humans appear to be celebrating the recent precipitation event. Indeed, more humans were emerging with what appeared to be specialized celebration equipment. Some carried containers filled with liquid refreshments. Others had portable seating arrangements. Several were setting up what looked like preparation areas for food consumption. They were having a party to commemorate surviving atmospheric liquid bombardment. The philosophical implications were staggering. In the broader galactic context, every other species in the coalition had achieved survival through technology, armor, environmental suits, terraforming, or simple avoidance of dangerous conditions. But humans had achieved something unprecedented. They had become genuinely integrated with their planet's natural systems. They hadn't conquered their environment. They hadn't dominated it. They hadn't even simply adapted to it. They had become part of it. "Pack it up," Vextler ordered finally, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that comes from making decisions that will probably result in lengthy debriefing sessions and psychological evaluations. "We're returning to the ship." "Sir, what about the mission parameters?" The mission was to assess this planet's defensive capabilities and evaluate the threat level posed by its inhabitants. Vextler folded the borrowed umbrella carefully, treating it with the respect due to superior technology that had been freely given by a species that treated it as commonplace. "I'd say we have our answer." Udut, as they made their way back to their concealed transport, moving carefully through a world that suddenly seemed both more dangerous and more beautiful than anything in their experience, Vexer Taylor continued to observe the human behavior around them. Near their transport, he caught sight of something that made him stop in his tracks. A human child, no more than 6 or 7 years old by their developmental standards, was sitting on what appeared to be a front step, reaching out with tiny hands to catch the last few raindrops as they fell from the edge of a roof overhang. The child's face was a picture of intense concentration and pure joy, as if capturing falling water droplets was the most important and rewarding activity in the universe. Each successful catch resulted in delighted giggles and renewed attempts to capture more of the precious liquid. The child was giggling at atmospheric liquid bombardment. The sound was unlike anything in Vextaler's experience. Pure, innocent happiness that seemed to transform the very air around it. It was the kind of laughter that suggested a species so fundamentally different from anything in their understanding that first contact protocols might need to be completely rewritten. "Sir," came Sergeant Cole Threx's voice as they reached their transport, "what exactly are we going to tell Command about this mission?" Vextaler watched the child successfully catch another droplet and examine it with the intense curiosity that seemed characteristic of young humans. The droplet sat perfectly in the small palm, harmless and clear and beautiful, before eventually evaporating in the warm air and leaving behind nothing but the memory of wonder. In the distance, more humans were emerging from buildings, many carrying implements designed to enhance their interaction with post-rain conditions. The entire community seemed energized and revitalized by the experience of being bombarded with falling liquid. "We're going to tell them," Vextaler said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of a revelation that would probably require several bottles of military-grade alcohol to properly process, "that we have discovered a species so adaptable, so resilient, and so fundamentally different from anything in our experience that they have turned their planet's most common environmental challenge into a source of joy." He paused, watching as more children emerged from nearby structures and began playing in the remaining puddles, their laughter creating a symphony of happiness that seemed to make the very air shimmer with possibility. "We're going to tell them that these humans don't just survive their environment, they celebrate it. They don't just endure their planet's challenges, they integrate them into their culture in ways that make those challenges become strengths. They don't fear what might kill them, they find ways to make it enhance their lives." As their transport lifted off and the human settlement grew smaller below them, Vextaler could see the full scope of what they had witnessed. The humans had built their civilization in harmony with water cycles that would have terrified any other species. Their cities channeled rain into beautiful fountains and gardens. Their agriculture depended on precipitation patterns they had learned to predict and celebrate. Their very architecture seemed designed to enhance the aesthetic and practical benefits of regular atmospheric liquid bombardment. They had taken the most basic requirement for life, water, and turned its delivery system into something that brought them joy. "And the rain, sir?" came Lieutenant Kixandra's final question. Vextaler looked down at the planet below, where humans were continuing their post-precipitation activities with the kind of casual contentment that comes from being perfectly adapted to your environment. Somewhere down there, more water was already beginning to condense in the natural atmospheric cycles, preparing for the next light shower that would send billions of perfectly harmless droplets cascading down onto a species that would greet them with umbrellas, gardens, laughter, and the kind of casual acceptance that transforms terror into wonder. The rain is the least dangerous thing on this planet, which is exactly why these humans are the most terrifying species in the galaxy.